You walk into a store just to browse. You have no intention of buying anything. Then you see it, a high-end leather jacket. It looks perfect, smells like quality, and feels amazing. You check the price tag, $800. You actually laugh out loud. That is absurd. You put it back on the rack, shaking your head. But then, out of the corner of your eye, you see a red sign above the rack. Clearance, 60% off. You do the math in your head instantly. That $800 jacket is now $320. Suddenly, a switch flips in your brain. A minute ago, spending $320 on a jacket was not even an option. It wasn't in your budget. It wasn't on your mind. But now, you aren't looking at a $320 expense. You are looking at a $480 saving. You feel a rush of adrenaline. You feel like you're beating the system. You walk to the register, card in hand, convinced you just made the smartest financial decision of the month. You didn't buy a jacket, you saved money. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You didn't save anything. You spent $320 you were never going to spend. And the only reason you did it is because of a psychological glitch that retailers, car salesmen, and salary negotiators have been using against you for your entire life. This is called the anchoring bias. It is the reason you overspend. It is the reason you settle for less money at work. And it is the reason you often stay in relationships that aren't good enough. You think you are making logical choices based on value, but you aren't. You're making comparative choices based on the first number or the first impression that was thrown at you. And understanding this isn't just about saving a few dollars at the mall. It is about understanding how your reality is being framed by everyone around you, and often by your own brain. To understand why you fell for that jacket, you have to look at how your brain processes information. Your brain is an incredible machine, but it's also lazy. Psychologists call this being a cognitive miser. Your brain wants to save energy. When it faces a decision, like is this item worth the price, or is this punishment fair, it doesn't want to start from scratch and calculate the intrinsic value of every single atom. That takes too much glucose. Instead, it looks for a reference point. It looks for an anchor. The anchor is the very first piece of information you receive. Once that anchor is dropped, your brain gets stuck there. Every subsequent judgment you make is just an adjustment away from that first number. In the case of the jacket, the anchor was $800. That was the first number you saw. It set the bar for value. When the price dropped to $320, your brain didn't compare $320 to $0, the money in your pocket. It compared $320 to $800. In that comparison, $320 looks tiny. It looks like a steal. This mechanism is so powerful that it overrides logic, even when you know the information is irrelevant. In a famous study from the 1970s, psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman asked people to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations. But before the participants answered, the researchers spun a wheel of fortune that landed on a random number between 0 and 100. Here's the crazy part. The people who saw the wheel land on a high number, like 65, guessed that the percentage of African nations was much higher. The people who saw the wheel land on a low number, like 10, guessed it was much lower. These were intelligent people. They knew a spinning wheel had absolutely nothing to do with geopolitics, but their brains couldn't help it. The first number they saw anchored their estimate, and they couldn't adjust far enough away from it. You do this every single time you look at a restaurant menu. You ever notice how there's often a wildly expensive item at the very top? A seafood tower for $120 or a Wagyu steak for $95. You probably won't buy that, but because you saw $120 first, the $35 chicken dish suddenly seems reasonable. If you had walked into a place where the most expensive item was $20, that $35 chicken would feel like a ripoff. The food hasn't changed, the value hasn't changed, only the anchor has. This happens because of a cognitive process called insufficient adjustment. You start at the anchor and you adjust your thinking until you reach a range that feels plausible, and then you stop. You stop thinking too early. You don't go all the way to the true value. You just go until you don't feel stupid anymore. And that is exactly where they want you. But it gets darker when you realize this applies to things far more serious than dinner or shopping. This bias bleeds into your career, your legal rights, and your human relationships. Take salary negotiations. This is the classic trap. You walk into an interview and you're nervous. You want the job. The recruiter asks, "So, what kind of salary are you looking for?" Most people panic here. They say, "Oh, I'm flexible," or they wait for the company to make an offer, thinking that's the polite thing to do. That is a strategic disaster. By letting them go first, you are letting them drop the anchor. If they say, "We're looking at a range of $60,000 to $70,000, that number is now burned into your brain. Even if you were secretly hoping for $85,000, you will now feel that asking for $85,000 is crazy or aggressive because it's so far from their anchor. You will likely counter with $72,000 and feel like you won. But if you had walked in and dropped the anchor first, if you had said, "Based on my research and experience, I'm looking at $90,000, you have set the ceiling. Now, $80,000 sounds like a compromise to them. By speaking first, you control the entire mathematical universe of the conversation. This even happens in the courtroom. Research involving judges, experienced, impartial professionals, has shown that the length of the sentence they hand down is heavily influenced by the sentence the prosecutor demands. If a prosecutor demands 20 years, a judge might give 12 and feel they are being lenient. If the prosecutor had demanded 10 years for the exact same crime, the judge might have given 7. The justice you receive depends on the first number spoken in the room. And perhaps the most insidious place this shows up is in your relationships and your self-esteem. We often talk about first impressions, but we don't realize that a first impression is just a social anchor. If you meet someone and they are incredibly charming, warm, and attentive for the first 3 dates, that creates a high-value anchor. 6 months later, when they start acting distant, dismissive, or even disrespectful, you don't judge their behavior objectively. You judge it against the anchor. You think, "They're just having a bad month," or "I know they're really a sweet person deep down." You stay in toxic situations way longer than you should because you are anchored to the version of them you met in the beginning, not the version of them that exists today. You are adjusting away from the perfect partner anchor rather than looking at the bad partner reality. This also works in reverse with your own self-image. The grades you got in high school or the way your parents spoke to you about intelligence when you were 12 act as anchors for your adult confidence. If you were labeled the messy one or the lazy one as a kid, that is your baseline. Even if you are wildly successful now, you might still feel like a fraud because you are constantly comparing your success to that original internal anchor of being messy. You aren't seeing your life clearly. You are seeing it through the lens of a number or a label that was assigned to you decades ago. So what do you do about this? You can't just turn off a cognitive bias. It is hardwired into your neural pathways. But you can learn to hack it. You can learn to spot the anchor and rip it out of the ground. The first strategy is what negotiators call the deflecting the anchor. If someone drops a lowball number on you, whether it's a salary offer or a price for a car, you must not counter with a number that is close to theirs. If you do, you have accepted their frame. Instead, you have to reject the anchor entirely. You can use humor or you can use shock. You say, "I think we are looking at 2 very different markets here," or simply, "That number isn't going to work for me to keep this conversation going." You have to physically, verbally clear the table. You need to reset the baseline. By refusing to engage with their number, you force the brain to look for a new reference point. The second strategy is called pre-anchoring. This is for when you are the buyer. Before you ever walk onto the car lot, before you ever look at the house, before you look at the sticker price, you must do your research and determine what the value is to you. Write it down.
I am willing to pay $15,000 for this car. When you walk in and see the sticker says $22,000, you aren't anchored to $22,000. You are anchored to your written number of $15,000. Now the $22,000 looks ridiculous rather than your $15,000 looking cheap. You have brought your own anchor to the fight. You are immune to their red sale tags because you know the real price. The third strategy is specifically for your decision-making, and it's called the counter-argument method. When you feel yourself fixating on a number like the list price of a house, force your brain to generate 3 specific reasons why that number might be wrong. Why is this price too high? What defects am I not seeing? What is the market doing? By actively generating arguments against the anchor, you weaken its hold on your prefrontal cortex. You force your brain to consider other data points. It feels like mental work because it is, but it snaps you out of the insufficient adjustment trance. And for the day-to-day stuff, the menu trick, just be aware of it. When you see the $100 platter at the top of the menu, smile, acknowledge what they are doing. They are trying to make you comfortable spending $40. By simply noticing the manipulation, there's the anchor, you rob it of its power. You can then look at the $40 chicken and ask, is this piece of chicken actually worth $40? Usually, the answer is no. But here's the biggest shift. This isn't just about avoiding manipulation, it is about seizing control of your own narrative. We spend so much of our lives reacting to the numbers and expectations other people set for us. We let our boss decide what our time is worth. We let the market decide what our house is worth. We let our exes decide what our love is worth. When you understand anchoring, you realize that all of these values are made up. They're just starting points. They're just someone else's guess or someone else's tactic. You have the right to set your own anchors. You can walk into a room and set the tone. You can decide that your time is valuable, that your work is premium, and that your presence is a gift. When you believe your own anchor, other people start to believe it too. Think about the most confident person you know. They probably don't wait for other people to tell them where to stand. They plant their feet and let the world adjust around them. That is the power of the first move. That is the power of the first number. So the next time you see a clearance sale, or you sit down for a performance review, or you meet someone new, pause, look for the anchor, spot the invisible weight they are trying to tie to your ankle, and then decide if you want to accept it or if you want to cut the rope and drop your own. Most people will go through their whole lives drifting wherever the currents of marketing and social pressure push them, tethered to anchors they didn't choose. But you see the mechanism now. You see the game, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You are free to decide what things are actually worth. The price tag is just a suggestion. The offer is just a question. The real value is whatever you decide it is.